Friends, I'm so pleased that you are here with us this evening. I'm thrilled to be here with Dr. Brown to learn from you this evening. What an honor. Thank you for coming. So let me start with some thank yous. I want to thank President Krause and the board of Eden for the good work that you have done and continue to do to keep Eden a really good place to be, to teach, to be a student. It's a great place, and I want to thank you for that good work. I want to thank the Eden staff who, in preparation for this, have been working overtime to do a whole host of things. We would not be here in the state that we are if it weren't for the staff, so I want to thank you for that. My Eden colleagues who research and teach in ways that regularly teach me and challenge me and call to me to be a better person. I am thrilled to be on the faculty with them, so thank you, my colleagues. And to you who are attending, students and alum and members of the community, thank you for being here today. We are so pleased to have you here. I look forward to conversations with you after all of this. So let's get started. So as Christopher said, he gave some of my background. What he didn't say was that for 26 years, I've been teaching in UCC seminaries. I am a United Methodist, so I like to tell people that I speak UCC with a Methodist accent. So today I want to share with you a few lessons that I've learned from the ground up about food insecurity, food waste, and what it means to partner in the mending of creation. My presentation will be followed by the transforming work of Dr. Heber Brown. So, my research and writing has focused on pastoral care in the public arena. While I was trained as a pastoral psychotherapist to think about suffering and healing at the individual level, most of my teaching and research and writing has focused on pastoral care in the public arena, and in particular on sexualized violence on college campuses, in the United States military, and in war-torn Bosnia and Rwanda. I care about how suffering is rooted in systems that do harm and believe healing is helped when we practice together to attend to individuals and communities and hold systems accountable. Academic theories and classroom explorations are only as helpful as their ability to equip students and faith communities to understand and reflect the specifics of lived human suffering and the redemptive work of faithful people. This ethic was important as I turned my focus to a new important area: food insecurities and food waste. So it started with an email. In August of 2019, I got a note from a student, Karen Petmeyer, asking a simple question. If she brought some potatoes gleaned by children and adults from St. John's UCC in Vincennes, Indiana, could I find a food ministry that could use them? Good question. For 7 years, I've been very active in issues of housing insecurity and poverty in St. Louis region. I teach a course on homelessness and poverty, and am very familiar with a whole list of services in St. Louis, so I could do that. Turns out it wasn't just some potatoes. It was 1,000 pounds of potato. They had been left in a field after harvesting machines were done, and they were to be plowed under. That is, they were to be disposed of. It was not difficult to find food ministries here in St. Louis that were thrilled to have them. That email started me on a new trajectory of pastoral care in the public arena, opening my eyes to food waste and food insecurities, the historically racist-infused practices that inform these, and the transforming work of partnering communities. It started on Eden's campus. You know, I've been teaching here several years, and no one ever talked about the Garden of Eden. So it was about time. So in the spring of 2020, we planted a community garden, and I hope that while you're here, you'll go back and visit it. This was thanks to the experience and wisdom of Karen Pettmeyer. Psalm 72 tells us that peace begins with feeding people, and that was important. In the words of Heber Brown, whatever land that God gave you and whatever land your church sits on, you can use it to the glory of God, your church, and your community. Ministry can also mean what you do in the soil, just as much as what you do in the sanctuary. I say amen and amen. Yes, you did say that. In July of 2020, we made our first trip to Vincennes, Indiana, to glean corn and potatoes. The biblical mandate to glean produce from fields was a fitting directive for this work. We partnered with farmers there who, of a number of different churches, recognized the gleaning stories. They recognized that they had produce that was going to waste, and they knew about hunger. So they have been amazing partners in this work. With that, we launched the Eden Gleaning and Garden Project. Our mission is clear: ending hunger, shrinking food waste, and connecting communities. Starting in March of this year, we were already planting for the new season, prepping the soil and prepping the ground for the plants to come. We invite you to join us when you're in town. And from June to about December, we make trips to Indiana and to other farms where in order to glean food and to distribute here in St. Louis. One of these ministries is Centennial Christian Church under the leadership of Pat Pendleton, who will tomorrow be on one of the practitioners' panels and following workshop. We launched the Eden Gleaning and Garden Project right about the time that the pandemic shut everything down, when face-to-face interactions became dangerous and communities gathered mostly online. As we quickly realized, the pandemic only amplified food insecurities and food waste. Last year, with the Eden Gleaning and Garden Project, we just collected and then distributed over 14,000 pounds of produce, including corn, potatoes, squash, collards, kale, tomatoes, broccoli, cabbage, and more. So we're not the first Eden community to grow and harvest food. This is from the 1850s. Faculty and students at the Evangelical Preachers Seminary, Eden's forerunner, near Marthasville, Missouri, German immigrants who worked the land while they prepared to preach the word. Our crew, not quite nicely dressed, of students, faculty, staff, partnering churches, farmers, and friends of Eden represent a new generation of faithful gardeners and gleaners responding to the biblical mandate to care for the most vulnerable. So in our planting and in our gleaning, the Eden Gleaning and Garden Project has taught us much about the ground up, about food insecurity, food waste, racist practices, and the transformative work of partnering in the mending of creation. I'd like to share a few of the lessons we've learned. So in the United States, more than 34 million people, including 11 million children, are food insecure. Every community in the country is home to families who face hunger. Black, Latinx, and Native American communities are especially hard hit by food insecurities. One thing we had not realized going into this, but came to understand, was that rural communities are especially hard hit by food insecurities. The pandemic has increased food insecurities among families with children and communities of color who already faced hunger at much higher rates before the pandemic. 56% of food insecure households reported participating in federal national programs, including SNAP and WIC. Households that don't qualify for that federal assistance and yet still need food assistance are left to use their local food banks and food programs, which generally don't have fresh produce. In February 2023, Congress allowed the COVID-era supplemental SNAP programs to stop. The resulting hunger cliff, as they call it, will hit many but target people of color, children, and older adults. So in the bi-state region, so kind of Missouri and Illinois, 1 out of 9, that's about 350,000 people, experience food insecurity. Part of the issue is that there are limited grocery stores in certain areas, particularly north of the Del Mar Divide, that have good produce that they carry. In Missouri, that's generally overall, and that's about 700,000 people, and that's nearly 200,000 children. And you'll remember that during the pandemic, when kids were no longer going to schools, that's often where they got their food. People are forced to make choices. Choices between paying for food or medical care, choices to feed their family versus utility bills, choice between paying for food versus paying for housing, or fuel for their car to get to work versus family food. Choices that no one should have to make. I've learned about food waste and how it relates to farming practices, racist histories, the pandemic, and consumer practices. 1/3 of the food that is produced in the United States goes unused. 1/3. That's an unsettling amount of wasted produce because of modern farming machinery and techniques. Larger truck farms, that is, farms, this is something that I got to learn. Being not someone from the rural community, I've learned a lot. But large truck farms, that is, farms that produce vegetables to sell at grocery stores, have a business model that assumes the reality of discarding thousands of pounds of produce before it leaves the field. The large truck farms, typically the ones who provide produce for larger chain stores, Walmart, Schnucks, other large ones, hire seasonal workers to harvest their produce. Seasonal workers tend to go through the fields once to harvest because the farmers can't afford to pay the seasonal workers to go through another time. So any of the produce that grows seasonally throughout, they only harvest it once. Everything else gets plowed under. So corn grows on a stalk, sometimes 4 and more ears. They'll pick one, and the rest of it gets plowed under. Farmers can't afford to have folks go back, the seasonal workers go back and do subsequent harvesting. The supply side of growing produce means that farmers can only harvest the produce you and I will buy. That is, the beautiful produce. Some produce is simply not pretty enough to sell commercially. It's supply and demand. When you and I buy only the most beautiful vegetables and fruit, that trickles down to the farmers who are forced to leave any produce in the field that doesn't meet the consumer's desires. So oftentimes when we go and glean, we'll see fields of squash that have already been picked that are lying there that are perfectly fine, but they won't meet our standards in the grocery store. So they just stay there and get disked under. Responding to public food demands and harvesting costs means that farmers are forced to disk under thousands of pounds of healthy produce each year. The pandemic brought a particular visibility to the problem. While millions of Americans worried about having enough food to eat and lines at food banks grew exponentially in the early days of the pandemic, Farmers had to plow under vegetable fields, dump milk, and smash eggs that they could not sell. The disruption in the food chain brought on by the pandemic shut down restaurants and hotels and schools. Those closures wiped out huge sources of demand for fresh produce, leaving farmers with millions of pounds of excess, which they had to discard. Not since the Great Depression has so much food been destroyed. In spring of 2021, in the heart of the pandemic, I received a call that a farmer had 150 dozen eggs that they could not use. People just weren't coming to the restaurant that would usually buy them. The farmer had already dumped gallons of milk. Did I know a food ministry that could use the eggs right away? 150 dozen. In fact, I did. I've learned about racist history and practices in food apartheid. I've learned about the concept of food apartheid that addresses how the whole food system is steeped in social inequities in which whole communities, predominantly poor communities of color, are geographically and economically isolated from healthy and nutritional food sources. I learned about the history of federal policies that both took land from Black farmers and made it impossible for Black farmers to pass along farms to their children. The Homestead Act of 1862 provided federal land grants to Western white settlers willing to farm the land. This was a mechanism for transferring millions of acres of Native American land to white settlers. And in 1865, General William Sherman issued an order, later known as the 40 Acres and a Mule, that redistributed southern plots of land to newly freed Blacks. This order lasted less than a year when President Andrew Johnson, Lincoln's successor, overturned the order. Newly freed Blacks never benefited from it. Black families could not easily acquire land. And this is important for us to note now because in farming, family land is part of the family legacy. In Black families, land did not get passed down. Even today, federal policies that create grants to protect farmers from crop loss don't regularly get used by Black farmers because Black farmers don't know about it. White farmers, having grown up on farms and having farming traditions and knowledge passed along to them, have inherited the knowledge and the connections. Black farmers have been left out of that process. And even when farming options are available, farming can be triggering and re-traumatizing. For Black Americans, in the words of Leah Penniman, the field was the scene of the crime. Leah Penniman's book, Farming While Black, offers some important resources for working with Black farmers to reclaim the life-giving nature of the land. And I'm so pleased that Dr. Brown is here tonight with us to teach us more. Yeah. Food waste and food insecurities are not new issues. In fact, one of the solutions is as old as our sacred text: gleaning. It's the biblically rooted practice of farmers leaving a portion of the field for the most vulnerable, the widow, the orphan, the alien. Gleaning was a practice in ancient Israelite society, placing the responsibility of caring for the most vulnerable squarely on the shoulders and in the fields of the landowners. The mandate was clear. From Deuteronomy 24, when you reap your harvest in your field and forget a sheaf in the field, you shall not go back to get it. It shall be left for the alien, the orphan, and the widow, so that the Lord your God may bless you in all your undertakings. Remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. Therefore, I am commanding you to do this. Leviticus 23 has a similar passage, and the entire book of Ruth is set in the context of gleaning. Theologically, gleaning can be interpreted in a variety of ways, but two ways that I find pretty interesting. You leave part of the harvest for the most vulnerable because we too were slaves in Egypt. That is, that is us or could be us. We could need that. Gleaning as a model of solidarity and liberation. Or, in offering up from our bounty, we live into God's mandate and as such bring favor upon ourselves. Gleaning as a way to gain favor with God. Lots of other interpretations. Those are two theological ones. Food waste, food insecurities, racist practices, all signs of deeply rooted systems that are not serving all of God's community. Feminist theologian Letty Russell knew systems of oppression are long and deep. She was clear that they will outlast any single individual attempt to change things. She knew the power of communities to make change. Letty called us to partner in the mending of creation as a way of sharing in God's mission to effect justice. Partnering in the mending of creation looks like communities coming together to think and share and act in ways that keep the needs of the most vulnerable at the center. Having access to healthy food is a fundamental human right. Growing healthy vegetables, gleaning nutritious food, and sharing with those who do not have access to life, enhancing food, is a redemptive way to respond. That image that you see there were all gleaned food. The Eden Gleaning and Garden Project is one way we are partnering to end hunger, reduce food waste, and to partner in the mending of creation. We're starting our 5th year of planting and gleaning, and we look forward to new things we will learn. Homeless advocate Jim O'Connell, when asked if he gets overwhelmed with the enormity of the problem, said, "This is what we do while we wait for the world to change." I invite you to join us in this partnership, in the partnerships that you can do in your communities together. It is joyous work. I invite you to come out. Friends, thank you. I should say this is the Eden garden there that every year we start the season by planting radishes to give appreciation for the work that's to come. So that's the Eden garden that has the big amen in it.